Hello and welcome back. So to continue our little mini series on the use of tourniquets on our extremities, I wanted to talk about staging your tourniquets, assuming that you've bought some, and I highly recommend keeping a couple in each of your trauma kits. And if you've read our blog post or listened to our podcast in the past, which I highly recommend you do, you've probably read or heard us talk about building out your basic trauma kit. And so just starting there a minute. So again, you should have 1 to 2 tourniquets, ideally one of the approved for quality gear in all of your trauma. Some people combine trauma and first aid together and just call it their first aid bag. Whatever you want to do. There is a separation between boo-boo bags and blowout bags. So we're focused, when it comes to tourniquets, we're focused more on the blowout bag, dealing with gunshot wounds, car accidents, industrial or farm accidents, anything. Severe bleeding can be caused by many things. We've talked about how having a basic trauma kit is a good idea, and we've talked about the need to have a basic trauma kit in multiple places where it makes sense. In the house, obviously, in your vehicle, maybe even out in the garage to access sooner if you had an accident out on the lawnmower or whatever. Hopefully that never happens, but the point is you just don't know. And so it's important to have multiple trauma kits with the gear that you need. If you haven't read our blog posts on trauma and first aid, we have a whole section dedicated to trauma and first aid. That also pulls in some of our podcasts where we've talked about some of those gears and tactics that you should think about employing for yourself and that of your family. So moving back to the tourniquet, talking about staging, when you get a tourniquet, a new tourniquet, it is almost always shrink wrap in clear plastic. It might have some sort of outer wrapping, but generally not. Generally, it's just shrink wrapped in plain old clear shrinkage. Don't put that in your kit or carry that tourniquet that way. Go ahead when you first get that tourniquet and tear it out of its packaging. Why? Because if someone's bleeding out on the side of the road in a car accident, or they lost their arm in the combine, or they got shot at the gun range, you don't want to spend those precious few seconds trying to tear open a shrink wrap, right? Shrink wrap packaging. So go ahead and take it out of its wrapper, and that will get you that much closer to being ready to employ it. Another key thing to do is it's okay if you keep the windlass out of the clip. I don't think it's going to save you a tremendous amount of time, but it's okay to keep it in the clip too. Just know you're going to have to get it out of there when the time comes. But one thing you certainly want to do, a lot of times the windlass strap, which is subsequently on some of these tourniquets where you write the time down. We'll talk more about that when we talk about applying a tourniquet. They'll come across the clip. So what you want to do is simply pull that to the side and Velcro it out of the way so nothing's holding you up. When you get through twisting up this windlass, nothing's holding you up from putting it into its clip and then locking that strap across. And the whole purpose, the strap generally serves 2 purposes. And you'll see some examples we'll talk about coming up where it doesn't always apply. But the first one is to hold the windlass in place. And the second one is to write the time down. And the time is very important, and we'll talk about that in an upcoming video. So take it out of the wrapper and move that windlass strap out of the way. The next thing that I want to talk to you about, or at least give you some ideas from consideration, and hopefully whoever you decide to get training from is going to talk about all of this stuff. So I fully expect there to be some overlap, but that's okay because you can't overlap the basics too much. In order to get good at the advanced stuff, you got to really get better at the fundamentals first. And we're just talking about fundamentals in this mini series of videos here. So Don't feel like you're going to get overwhelmed. We're trying to keep it basic and simple for you. But I feel like these are just some things that we do need to cover up front. Whether you go to get training or not, you'll at least have them in the back of your head. And if the day comes, hopefully not, that you need to use a tourniquet, you'll at least remember in part what you should be doing. So when we talk about staging, the other consideration is whether or not to keep that tourniquet in its buckle. I think I'm safe to say that all this style tourniquet comes with the belt through the buckle by default, and that's fine. That's the way they come in that case, and that's okay. I'm going to throw this, because this is what I was taught, I'm going to throw this out on the table for consideration. And we'll talk about more of this here in a minute. But ideally, you should have more than one tourniquet on hand. So I'm just going to say that. And so if you do have more than two, if you do have more than one, ideally two, you should consider keeping maybe one threaded and ready to go that way, and one unthreaded, ready to go that way. Why? Well, because unless you're omnipotent and can see into the future, you will have no idea how many injuries you have, or where your injuries will be, or whether or not you're working on yourself or someone else. And if you can predict all that in the future, you may not need tourniquets in the first place, because you can probably avoid any and everything. But I digress. I suspect most of us cannot do that. So again, with two tourniquets in mind, staging one in the belt, one in the buckle, one outside the buckle. Okay, why? One in the buckle, whether you're having to work on yourself or someone else, is going to make it a lot easier to get onto your arm. And most importantly, more than likely, a lot faster. If you're working on yourself, and that's true whether you're working on yourself or someone else, more than likely most of the time. If you're working on yourself or someone else and they have a leg injury, or a very bad leg injury, or let's say they, I don't even know what a good scenario is, but if you're working on yourself and you're writhing in pain and you're bleeding out, and you got this through the belt loop, you might find this hard, because you're going to have to be, and you're probably already either sitting or laying down. You're going to have to now fish this loop over your foot and pull it up your leg and get that into place. That may not be as easy for you as undoing it and then looping it underneath. And sorry, you can't see this right now. Again, I'll cover this in detail when we talk about application of tourniquets. It may be easier to keep one undone so you can thread it underneath a leg to make the long story much, much shorter, right? Plus, and this is going to be a little bit gruesome, but plus if you've got this loop, and whether you're working on yourself or especially someone, or not especially, but you know what I'm saying, someone else, lassoing this or even just feeding it over a limb, if a limb's been amputated or severely amputated, and you got bone and meat and tissue, bone and muscle and tissue hanging out, this could get caught on any of that, any number of those things, right? So if you have it undone, you can simply thread it underneath and then put it in and then go to work. So that's just some considerations. And again, how you decide, and if you only carry one, how you decide to carry that one is entirely up to you. Just know if you're working on yourself, it's a little faster and easier to keep it in the loop on your arm, but it might be a little faster and easier to keep it unlooped if it's a leg injury. And I don't know how you're going to predict what injuries you have or how many injuries you have. I guess the last thing that I'll say, and I've already talked about it a little bit, is ideally you should have 2 tourniquets for every person that you're looking to provide aid for. So what that means is, translated simply, is if you're a family of 4, ideally you should have 8 tourniquets on hand. Now, Would I recommend you have 8 tourniquets in every single trauma kit or first aid kit you may have? One in the house, one in the vehicle, one in the garage, one in the basement? Not necessarily, because what are the odds of needing all of those? And that's a lot of money. Even 8, you know, that's $240 at $30 a pop, and that's probably on the low side, right? So I'm not suggesting you do that multiple times, but I am saying that you should consider having 2 tourniquets minimum per individual that you plan on rendering aid for. And that's because you don't know how many are going to be injured and how severe they're going to be injured. You don't know if they're going to have an arm injury or a leg injury or both legs or both arms. And most importantly, and we'll talk about this too in application of tourniquets, one tourniquet may not get it. So what are you going to do if the first tourniquet doesn't work? You know, you put it on, you've tightened the windlass down as far as you can, and you still got blood. There's a use for a second tourniquet going approximately, above that first tourniquet to hopefully get that blood shut off. So because of all the variations and permutations of what could happen, injury types, where the injuries are, how many people are injured, that sort of thing, you want to consider having a minimum of 2 tourniquets per person. And look, it's okay, I get it, budget's a thing, right? You don't have to start out there, but know that you're working towards that goal. So heaven forbid the time come when you need them, you've got enough for at least you and your family on hand, if nothing else. And with that, we'll leave you on some staging tips. Hopefully that we've talked across this little mini series so far. We've talked about what tourniquets are, the types of tourniquets there are. We've talked about colors, and now we've covered some staging tips and advice for you when you do get your tourniquets. So stick around. We've got some more info for you coming up in the very near future. We'll see you soon.